What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari had a defect that no one, absolutely no one in Maranello, had detected until after 3 races? What if I told you that this invisible problem could be what has silently sabotaged its debut with the Scuderia? What Frédéric Vasseur found after the Canada Grand Prix can change the course of the 2025 championship. Stay, because this goes far beyond a simple broken piece. The first alarm signs were lit in Australia. The car seemed to have rhythm in certain conditions but could not keep it. In classification, Hamilton was in a respectable position, but the inconsistencies began during the race. Under wet track conditions, the traction of the SF25 disappeared at times, and the British pilot was trapped behind theoretically slower cars, without the ability to easily advance. The engineers initially blamed the problem to Lewis's adaptation to a completely new car, their adjustments in the braking style, and the lack of knowledge with Ferrari's motor maps. But in China, what was suspicious became worried serious. Despite a promising start in the classification, Hamilton was disqualified after the race for excessive wear on the board. This incident revealed anomalous behavior at the bottom of the car. Ferrari had been running dangerously low in his search to optimize aerodynamic load. And yet, the most alarming was not the penalty, but the fact that neither the team nor the pilot seemed to completely understand why the car was playing bottom so often. The simulations did not match reality on the track. The data collected in the long steins did not show a clear pattern. Sometimes the car behaved with stability. Other times, I lost balance without apparent reason. It was as if the SF25 had 2 personalities. Analysts began to notice that the problems intensified with certain tire compounds, particularly the rear soft, and that the imbalance appeared in specific sequences of curves, especially when leaving slow turns with high lateral load. To this was added a sensation reported by Hamilton, a variability in the rear axle response that could not be explained with telemetric data. Hamilton, meanwhile, was increasingly frustrated but also determined. The turning point came after the Canada Grand Prix. Already without margin to continue improvising minor theories or adjustments, Frédéric Vasseur decided to intervene personally. As a team director, it was not usual to lead technical inspections thoroughly, but the level of confusion was such that it decided to take an unconventional measure. He ordered a thorough review of the Hamilton chassis, with special emphasis on the rear suspension, an area that, in vehicle dynamics analysis, had begun to raise suspicions. What they found was surprising. It was not an obvious breakage or an outside component. It was a progressive distortion in one of the lower arms of the rear suspension, a minimal deviation of microns, which under high load conditions such as those that occur in rapid curves or during braking phases on descent caused a micro-dissemination imperceptible in static or banking conditions. This small displacement altered the alignment of the wheel, and with it, the entire dynamic geometry of the rear train. It affected both the angle of fall and the toe-in, and that had a waterfall effect on the behavior of the flat background, which began to lose aerodynamic efficiency at key times of the return. This phenomenon was not detectable through the digital models that Ferrari used in its simulations for a very specific reason. The suspension dynamic models assume structural tolerances within safe parameters, but do not contemplate non-linear mechanical deformations by manufacturing default. Only a physical analysis with direct contact instruments and real load tests could reveal such anomaly. It was exactly what Vasseur ordered. In a test bench with actuators that replicated the forces G de Carrera, the defective suspension arm was irregularly moved. It was an assembly failure, an imperfection that no sensor had registered before. The most dramatic thing about this finding is that it explains almost surgically the symptoms that Hamilton had been experiencing. The unbalance in high-speed curves, the sensation of a rear axle that escapes, instability when entering curve with used tires. Everything converged towards that unique defective piece. But beyond the relief that could have meant finding the cause, the discovery also generated internal concern. If that component passed the quality controls, how many other monoplays of the equipment could be affected? Was it an isolated case or a lot manufacturing problem? For weeks, Hamilton's performance problems were justified as part of the adaptation process, a logical learning curve in the face of the change of team, car, and technical environment. However, with the defect already identified and isolated, it was clear that part of the low performance was not the responsibility of the pilot, but of the team. That mistake cost Ferrari valuable points, but even more important, it cost him time, the most limited and precious resource in a tight championship. The consequences were multiple. At the sports level, Ferrari began the season from behind. While McLaren consolidated his domain with an extremely efficient platform and Mercedes began to emerge with his new technical generation, Ferrari was not only fighting for performance, but did it with data contaminated by a structural failure. All the information collected during free training, career simulations, and correlation tests was partially vitiated. The adjustments applied to Hamilton were based on a car that did not represent the physical reality of what SF25 should be. This means that even optimized setups were far from optimal because they responded to a chassis with distorted geometry. And that technical lag has long-term implications. The defective suspension caused Ferrari to develop wrong corrective measures. To mitigate the symptoms, the rear suspension system had further softened the filming height. These technical decisions, in principle logical, did not solve the underlying problem and, in fact, deteriorated the global aerodynamic performance of the car. The SF25 was working with a conservative configuration, away from its optimal window, depriving its pilots to exploit the true potential of the car. And at the same time, the career strategy was negatively affected. Greater filming height means greater sensitivity to the lateral wind, worse efficiency of DRS, and a less effective flat background in high-speed areas. The most dramatic case was that of disqualification in the China Grand Prix. The excessive wear of the Hamilton rear sliding block was not a coincidence or a strategic carelessness. It was the direct consequence of a car that, to try to be competitive, had to operate to the limit of its physical tolerance. That episode, which was initially perceived as an excess of aggressiveness in the setup, was later understood as a symptom of a car that forced unnecessary risks to compensate for a structural failure. It was not an isolated failure. It was part of a decision chain based on a wrong premise. From this moment on, Ferrari faces a double task. First, they must redesign key elements of the suspension to prevent similar distortion again. This implies not only changing the piece, but to review all the philosophy of load and deformation of the rear axle, a process that takes time and resources. Second, they need to rebuild the confidence of their star pilot. Hamilton has demonstrated an exceptional ability to adapt, even changing his braking style to approach Leclerc, but it is not a secret that a pilot of his caliber needs a stable technical environment to maximize his performance. What is coming now is a constant validation period. Ferrari will have to try multiple suspension and filming height configurations during free practice sessions, comparing real-time data between both pilots. There will be deliberate differences in the setup between Hamilton and Leclerc to better understand how the car responds to different aerodynamic load ranges. Every Friday will be a test laboratory disguised as training, and each classification session a fire test. All with a single goal: to recover the optimal performance window of the SF25 before the championship is escaped. And although Vasseur's finding marked a before and after, there is no guarantees that the rest of the season be an ascending line. The car needs to be understood again from scratch. The correlation maps between wind and track tunnel must be reconfigured, and engineers must rethink their development approach for the following updates. Ferrari knows that he has lost a valuable time on track, and in a calendar as tight as that of 2025, that may be the difference between fighting for the championship or being a secondary actor. Hamilton, meanwhile, has recovered something more important than a competitive car: the certainty that he was not wrong. His insistence, his capacity for technical reading, and his experience have been key to uncovering a problem that, if not identified, would have condemned the Ferrari season in silence. Now the team has a second chance. And in Formula One, those do not usually arrive twice. The finding of Frédéric Vasseur in SF25 represents something much deeper than a simple technical correction. It is a lesson on the limits of knowledge in the modern era of Formula One, where simulations, wind tunnels, and artificial intelligence dominate decisions, but where there is still room for the most fundamental human errors. That such a critical anomaly has remained hidden during 3 great awards speaks of the complex, fragile, and multifaceted that this discipline is. Even in the competition engineering pinnacle, a tiny detail can sabotage a multi-millionaire operation. Ferrari has faced a high-risk situation. They were close to building a failed narrative around one of the most talented pilots of all time, and not because Lewis Hamilton has lost speed or motivation, but because a simple badly calibrated piece threatened to drag the entire team to discredit. What was discovered in time avoided not only a championship error, but a possible internal fracture in the team. This incident also leaves a clear signal for the rest of the grill. The rival teams now observe care how Ferrari reacts, if he is able to learn from this stumbling or if he falls back into the inertia of past errors. Because beyond technical correction, the really important thing is how a team is rebuilt after being exposed. Will you take advantage of this turning point to redefine your technical approach, improve your quality control, and refine your track sensitivity? Or will it be just a temporary solution to a deeper structural problem? And this is where you enter. What do you think of all this? Do you think Ferrari can redesign your season from this finding, or the damage is already done? Can Hamilton recover the lost terrain and challenge McLaren, Red Bull, or even Mercedes? We want to know your point of view. Leave it in the comments.